A Passion for Mushrooms by Chrononautical. Chapter 15. Countless Stars. Of course, Erebor had a great stadium for people to fight to the death in. Naturally, fighting to the death in front of a great host of spectators, practically the whole mountain, was an important dwarvish tradition. Who wouldn't want to watch two good women try and kill each other? As was customary, they could all gather together, enjoy a lovely murder, and then eat hot sausages.
Peace,
Thorin grumbled.
It is an opera hall for theatricals, music, juggling, storytelling, and the like. You have only not seen it used as such, because the upper tiers were unsound, and repairing them has not been a priority. Still, all who would witness this must be allowed to do so. Balin set crews to it during the night, and the infrastructure should be safe enough now.
Knowing that the place was not meant only for fighting did change Bilbo's opinion of the arena itself. The center staging area where the action would take place was quite large, nearly half the size of his mine, but it was nothing compared to the great steps surrounding it. Around three sides of this stage were immense stone steps with long benches going nearly up to the vaulted ceiling. Thousands of dwarves could easily see the fight, though Bilbo noted that many who sat in the upper levels had spyglasses and other contraptions to help them see detail at a distance. Behind the stage, on the fourth side, was an immense stone statue of Mahal, the creator of the dwarves. It seemed that he would witness the bloodshed as well, but Bilbo liked to think of him watching juggling and music in better days during times past. He looked to be a kindly valor with a noble face. His enormous eyes seemed gently amused by all that passed below. Bilbo was glad to sit next to Thorin on the very first level, with only a low stone wall separating him from the floor, where Tauriel and this would fight. Watching the two women prepare for battle, he tried to think of anything that he could do or say to stop it. If only the fight had been over treasure or land, perhaps he might have, just as he had once stopped their respective nations from warring. Unfortunately, this time the Argotstone was Keely, and the lad had a mind of his own. The young prince was standing with Tauriel, making his allegiance quite clear as he tied one of her leather bracers with his small, nimble hands. Her armor was well maintained, but it was only elvish leather. Tauriel was equipped much as Bilbo had seen her when she and Keely went hunting. She wore a sleeveless leather doublet, bracers, and tall boots, but long portions of her oversized limbs were protected only by thin green cloth. What made her seem even more vulnerable was the lack of a bow. An archer had an unfair advantage over a hand-to-hand fighter, so apparently Tauriel would only be fighting with her two long knives. At the other side of the arena, this looked entirely ready for war. The princess wore full dwarven plate mail. It covered every inch of her body, from her toes to the tips of her gauntleted fingers. No knife was sharp enough to slip between the well-crafted seams, and no elf would be strong enough to dent it. In her hands she held a war-axe, nearly half her own size, sharp as a razor, and twice as deadly. Fili lowered the helm onto her head like a crown, and Bilbo could see him murmuring something to her, likely a final plea to forego this desperate action. This shook her head, and pounded the helmet to be sure it was in place. It was almost time. Bending a little to press her forehead to Keely's for good luck, Tauriel seemed surprised when the dwarf tilted up to kiss her lips. Surprised, but not displeased. She returned the kiss with a deep affection, and without any concern for the thousands who watched in disapproval. Bilbo thought it was very sweet, though he would have thought them sweeter if they had simply run away together. They might live quite happily in Rivendell, Minas Tirith, Bree, or any number of other places where no one wanted to kill either of them. Thorin put a heavy hand on Bilbo's thigh to stop his leg from shaking. That was actually a very effective distraction, the hand being quite warm, and on Bilbo's thigh, and belonging to Thorin. Bilbo wondered if he might not someday offer Thorin a ring himself. The king would never accept, of course, but his hand was on Bilbo's thigh, so perhaps it would not hurt very much to try. Given the heat of Thorin's hand and its proximity to to his person, Bilbo could hardly be expected to pay attention to the goings-on in the center of the arena. The hobbit was barely able to take note of the way Fili fetched his brother from Tauriel's side, or the lingering touch of the lovers' hands as they were pulled apart. He was being very completely diverted. Even Thorin's hand moving wasn't enough to distract Bilbo when the princes came to sit beside the king, and the two fighters bowed before him, though. Thorin nodded once gravely, and that was all it took. With a great clash, the fighters joined. Tariel was like a dragonfly, slipping around Dis almost too fast for the eye to follow, her knives flashing fiercely in the glittering light of dwarvish lanterns. Dis was like a force of nature, utterly unaffected by Tariel's attack, swatting away blows as she would a gnat. When the dwarf swung her mighty axe, Tariel had no choice but to leap and dodge away. A single blow from that weapon would likely seal her fate. After the first exchange, Tariel seemed to realize that her knives could do nothing against Dis, and she took up a more defensive posture. Bilbo didn't see how that could serve her particularly well in the end, but he was happy enough to watch her focus on staying away from the crushing blows that cracked the stone floor wide open. "Oh," he realized softly when he noticed the pattern to her footwork.
"That axe will not be blunted by stone no matter how many times it hits the ground,"
Thorin said, as if warning Bilbo not to get his hopes up. "She's not looking to blunt the axe," Keeley said, and Bilbo could hear a smile in his voice, though he did not dare look away from the fighting to see it. "Of course she isn't," Bilbo agreed happily. "That wouldn't do much good at all." Moments later, it happened. Dis struck hard and buried her axe in a place of Tariel's choosing, where the stone had already been cracked by a previous blow. Leaping high, Tariel knocked some of the large stones against the side of the axe blade, making it more difficult for Dis to pull loose. Then, with all of her weight, the elf landed on the blunt edge of the axe, jerking it free from the dwarf's grip, and for good measure she brought the hilt of both her knives crashing down on top of Dis's helmet. For a breath, Bilbo thought that must be it. Dis was unarmed, and Tariel had made a graceful ending. He should have known better. He, of all people, knew how hard the head of the Lady Dis could be. Without hesitation, Dis slammed her armored fist into Tariel's cheek. The steel points Bilbo had thought decorative gouged long bloody lines across the elf maiden's beautiful face. Tariel fell backward, looking horribly still as Dis kicked her gut with a heavy boot. As the slender elf lay bleeding on the stone, Dis bent once more to pick up her axe. Out of the corner of his eye, Bilbo could see Keeley standing at the low wall between the first row of spectators and the fighters. Barely restrained by his brother's arms, he was screaming for Tariel to get up. Bilbo did not turn to look at him or give him comfort. All his attention was on the still form sprawled against the stone as Dis raised her axe. Kicking up, both of Tariel's boots connected with the underside of Dis's helmet. As the elf flew into the air, vaulting over the dwarf, the war helm was lacked loose and clattered to the ground. Once again, Tariel flew at Dis like a mosquito, raining 1,000 little blows against the armor that she could not dent. Only this time, that armor had a vital weak point. It was not enough. Dis was not as fast as Tariel, but she kept her axe up and protected her head. If she struck out less than before, there was still no substantial change. A single good blow would be enough to fell the elf, while Tariel could land many to no effect. Yet something about the situation seemed to be infuriating Dis. She roared and cursed, trying to shake the elf loose with powerful, angry swings that seemed far less efficient than her formerly precise strikes. It took an especially obvious smack from one of Tariel's knives for Bilbo to realize what it was. "She's hitting her with the flat of the blade," he whispered.
"Only when she strikes her face,"
Thorin said, immediately sounding defensive. Then,
"It is very foolish. Tariel will die if she does not at least strike to wound."
Thorin was wrong. In her rage, Dis swung out too far. Somehow, Tariel caught her by the arm and rolled her to the ground. They went careening and bouncing together across the stone floor, carried by the weight of the armor and the momentum of Tariel's pull. When they came to a stop, Tariel was straddling Dis's chest elegantly with one of her knives pointed at the underside of the dwarf's chin. Though blood streamed from the cuts on her cheek and she was breathing hard, her victory was clear. Spitting a stream of rapid-fire curses and guzzled up at her, Dis finally said, "I will not yield. If you will not leave my son alone, elf, you will suffer and die for it. Though I must die first by your hand, I shall still count it a victory, for my family will be your doom." "Yes," Tariel said in a clear voice that seemed to ring from the vaulted ceiling to the statue of the Valor, where he stood watching over them all. "That is the way of my kind, should we love a mortal. When the love is gone, I will fade. I will die for Keeley. If that day be today, then let it be today, for it is my choice, and I do not regret it. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I know there can be no forgiveness for what happened between our peoples. I only ask for clemency." She looked over to where Keeley stood in his brother's arms. He may yet live 200 years more. Let us have that chance. For 200 years of dwarvish fire, I will give all the ages of starlight that were mine by right of birth. Even then you, Lady Dis, will have crafted my destruction. Can that not be enough? Is there no room in your heart for such a mercy?"
Bilbo could not see Dis's face.
Nor could he hear what she said next, so quietly that he thought Tadiel alone understood it. However, she must have yielded, because Tadiel stood and offered her a graceful hand up. Shoving the hand roughly away, Dis said loudly, "I do not give you leave to wed. However, so long as you make him happy, I will grant this stay of execution." "We are already wed by the traditions of my people," Tadiel said, and Bilbo could have cursed her for saying something so provocative. Fortunately, Dis did not leap to strike her dead for the affront. "But elvish weddings are simple things that need trouble no one else. I know Dwaro value effort, and happily will I prove my faith for 100 years, if that is what it takes to earn your blessing."
Dis frowned. Then she nodded once, picked up her axe, and strode from the arena. That seemed to be it. The spectators all rose from their seats, politely exiting. There were no speeches of conclusion, no declarations of valor. The matter was simply ended. Leaping over the wall, as he had been trying to do since the first time Tadiel was injured, Keely rushed to the elf's side. Smiling with delight, she bent to kiss him, but he only pecked her lips, his fingers scrambling to undo the laces of her doublet. Blushing furiously, Bilbo turned around, nearly falling backward over the low wall himself. Catching him around the waist, Thorin righted the hobbit easily. "Whatever do you think my nephew is doing?" Thorin's laugh was a warm rumble in the shell of Bilbo's ear, and Bilbo thought again that it might be worth a little awkwardness at breakfast one morning to offer him a ring, just to see if he was open to the idea of being courted by the most ridiculous person in his kingdom. Behind him, Bilbo heard Tadiel protesting. "I am fine." "You are not fine," Keely insisted. "You have 2 broken ribs at least from that kick, or will you tell me that you haven't been favoring your left side?"
"Bruises only," she promised. "I no longer even feel them now that my doublet does not press upon them so." Turning back, Bilbo saw the young couple curved quite sweetly toward each other, so that their foreheads were only just touching. "I would not ever have you take a hurt from me," Keely confessed, gently touching the deep gouges on her cheek. "Yet gladly would I suffer the tortures of Mordor for 1,000 years if it meant I could be rewarded with the touch of your hand for 5 minutes." Smiling as though she did not feel the pain of her wounds, Tadiel pressed another gentle kiss to Keely's mouth. Bilbo thought their love was a noble one, triumphing in the face of adversity, with all the joys and sorrows of a great and beautiful hope, sacrificing an immortal life for mortal happiness. That was the sort of love one would expect for princes and kings. It was so much more than a hobbit's love, which could only ever be quiet breakfasts, mushroom farms, and other unworthy things. There were tears in his eyes, and he was really very happy for them both.